This podcast is proudly sponsored by the Catholic Order of Foresters, a Catholic fraternal benefit society dedicated to helping members achieve financial security through life insurance while supporting the Catholic community through fraternal outreach. Hey folks, we are back again, ever ancient, ever new. Jeromy Darling here with Father Kyle Kowalczyk, plumbing the depths of beauty in the Christian faith. And we're both, I don't know if you would use the word athlete, but I've used the word athlete to describe myself in the past. You recently ran a marathon, something I have sworn off ever doing at any point in my life.
Well, you talk about ancient things, right? You know, this goes way back. Yeah, you know, it's funny because I swore off running at one point in my life as well. Yeah, I ran cross country. So I had one of my best friends back in middle school was into track and cross country. So 8th grade I ran track, 9th grade I ran cross country, and I hated it. And so the next year I played soccer.
Way better sport.
And then the next year I played tennis because it's even less running. And then finally I got into theater, and then it's like, you know, there's no real running there.
You got golf probably in between those two things, but.
So I no interest in running. If I'm not chasing something I loved, and I was always into sports and athletic and pickup sports and intramurals and things like this. And but if I'm not chasing something, then let's forget about it.
Yeah.
So about 15 years ago, a friend of mine was talking about how he had done the Twin Cities Marathon. And the way that he spoke about it was so vivid that I wasn't even a runner, and I was like, I want to run a marathon. And I don't know why. And I mean, he said, he was like, I remember certain moments in my life, like the day I got married and the time I held my firstborn son. And
jeez.
And he goes, but I remember every mile of that marathon like it was yesterday. I'm like, whoa.
Oh, jeez.
So it's been stuck in the back of my head, but I wasn't a runner. So I'm like, why would I run a marathon? Even though it's like something about it I wanted to do. And then about 5 years ago, I started getting into running a little bit. I had a family at my parish who was into running, and they'd invite me to go running with them. So I'd run, and then we did a 10K together, and I did pretty well on it. It was fun. I'm, still in my 30s at this point, and, don't have to train too hard to get back into shape. And then
Theoretically.
And then 2 years ago, I ran a half marathon, and then this year, about sometime in the spring, it was in my mind like, I kind of want to run a marathon.
Oh man!
And then I asked a friend who's run several, and I said, I kind of want to run a marathon, but I'm not sure why. And she said, and I said, why did you want to run your first marathon? And she goes, I run them now because I learned something new about myself in the process every single time.
Wow!
But the first time I ran it, I didn't know why either. And
just
I'm like,
an itch.
Yeah.
An itch you had to scratch.
So I'm like, okay, well, I guess. So I went home and I signed up that day. And I was on the waiting list because COVID had reduced the numbers. And so I'm on the waiting list, and I'm half like, I hope they pick me. I hope they pick me. And then I'm half like, I hope they don't pick me. I hope they don't pick me. Then I started, the training, because I had to start training before I'd known if I was going to get in. So I'm into the training. I'm really enjoying it. And now I'm like, I hope they pick me, because now if I don't, I'm already training. I'm going to have to find another marathon somewhere. And I really fell in love with the running process this year. And there are some like great spiritual lessons that I gleaned and that I grew in. One thing, I mean, I think this is funny, is most people, when I say, hey, I'm running a marathon, like the number one response is, ew, gross.
That was my response. Oh, have fun with that.
Why would you do that? So I was talking to my brother about it, and I was like, that seems like an odd response, because I told him, and he's like, way to go, man. And I'm like, yeah, why isn't that the response? Why aren't people, he goes, I think people really mean way to go, man, but they're kind of putting themselves in your shoes and being like, oh, I don't want to do that.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
But like, I would have a 15-mile run or 20-mile run, and people are like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, oh yeah, I got a 20-mile run later today. And they're like, oh, I could never do that. And that's the thing. I say, well, no, 4 months ago, I couldn't do that either. But that's the beauty of a training program. And you go out and you run 2 miles, and then you run 3 miles, and then you run 4 miles, and it just builds up slowly. And I was following a training plan, and one of the days that kind of astounded me the most, the plan so far had been slow runs, medium runs, and then all of a sudden it was, today you're running 13.1 miles, half a marathon, and you're going to run it at the pace you want to run your marathon. And I hadn't been training at pace. I'd been training at, a minute or a half a minute per mile under pace.
Oh.
And so I get into the pace right off the bat, like 8 minutes and 30 seconds a mile or something for what my goal was. And I'm running. I'm like, whoa, that's fast. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't maintain that. For 13 miles, I can't do this. But I just kept going.
Huh.
And my legs didn't get tired, and I didn't run out of oxygen. And
Wow.
And it was really just a beautiful moment of like, wow, the training works. And I think that that's something that, we sometimes we'll look at the saints, right? And we can look at the saints and say, I could never do that.
Huh.
Yeah, today you can't do that. But if you started training for that, you could do that.
Correct.
And that's, I think in the spiritual life, we need to have that understanding of growth in virtue, just building a habit, which is becoming second nature, allowing the Lord to transform us the way that a physical training plan literally transforms our muscle structure,
Yeah.
so that we can do things that we couldn't do before.
Yeah, it's in the tradition I came from, that was our, actually a really good understanding of kind of incarnational Christianity, or the spirit meeting the physical, was just this great analogy of them. And we knew it affected in some way our spiritual discipline, right? Being physical and challenging our body in that way. But that was about as close as we got to any kind of like sacramental understanding of Christianity, was that there's something about physical training, and we see athletes do it all the time for medals that don't last. I mean, I can't remember. Growing up, even watching the Olympics, I loved the Olympics. That was, I don't know, like the late 80s and 90s was like a pretty good time to be watching the Olympics, as far as I know, in terms of like Olympic history in America. And I would always watch and admire these people. Like, they gave everything, everything for years of their life to get this medal, and for a brief moment to be the best in that particular thing. But 4 years later, I'm like, wait, who?
Right.
Who won last year? And if you're lucky, you might only get to do 2. Over 8, if you start really young at like 17 or 18, you happen to be really gifted, maybe you can get 3 in before you're done. But it's such a weird thing, because I'm thinking like team sports, you play every season, but Olympics is like every 4 years. And between that is just your whole life is trying to be the best at that thing, and the thing that you can't take with you. But of course, we quietly always, Christian or not, religious or not, admire these people that gave something so significant to be briefly, for a time, like the best in that arena. And my dad would always use that analogy, how shameful it was that athletes would so often embarrass Christians with their devotion to a sport. Mm-hmm. And here we worship the God of the universe, and we give him such little devotion in time, whether it's physically, spiritually, emotionally, or otherwise. I think, because my wife has done a couple of Twin Cities marathons.
Oh, yeah?
And I walked like half of the first one with her just to help her get through. And I remember at the end thinking, yep, glad I didn't do that whole thing. And that was as awful as I thought it was. For me, growing up, what I hated about running, I shouldn't say growing up, but as I got later in my teens and 20s, was the boredom and the silence. I actually think secretly that might be what drives a lot of people crazy about running, because you're alone with your thoughts. And I don't know about anyone listening, but I don't like running or even exercising really with headphones, because I feel like they're always falling out, or I'm adjusting them constantly. Because I would try sometimes to do like audiobooks while I work out. It never works out that great. And I think when it comes to running, my theory is, and maybe this is why I was so averse to it, is it's a long period of silence.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I would say that was one of my conversions this year during running. Early on, put in my headphones, I listen to audiobooks, podcasts, Only this podcast is the only podcast that I listen to. Oh wait, we didn't exist 6 months ago.
That's right.
Now listen to podcasts and audiobooks and things, and because it's like I want to distract myself from the pain that's being inflicted on me, and gradually as I started to enjoy the running more, I started leaving my headphones and my phone home more, and I could go out for an hour run or a 2-hour run with nothing. And especially if you go early in the morning and you're out in the woods, it's just peace. And it's the birds chirping, and it's, the squirrels rustling, and it's beautiful. Now I don't think to bring my headphones at all. I don't want that.
That's very interesting.
And even on the marathon, I was surprised as to how many people do have headphones, because there's all these people cheering for you. And although maybe you're trying to block that out, because a couple, if you're training for, your whole training season is silence, and then the Twin Cities Marathon has thousands, 10,000 people.
Ringing bells.
Cowbells. Oh,
clapping
man. Yeah, there's a couple times where I'm like, okay, enough cowbell, please. But yeah, I would say that was kind of my conversion, that I enjoy the peace, the silence, time with the Lord. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I had probably what I would call my own kind of post-Christ conversion. It might have been 6 or 7 years ago, and I realized, I began telling friends, you know what? I don't like being alone. I really don't like being alone to myself. Part of that maybe is a charism. I love being around people. I love the sound of children. I'm fine with noise and all of that. But I realized that I actually was really uncomfortable in quiet, alone time. What I meant, the word I used was alone. What I meant was I don't like quiet. And I didn't know what to do with that. I knew I needed to tell somebody, and maybe that I could be held accountable in this sort of revelation. But that was really hard for me to come to terms with, and I began to kind of wonder why. And I did try. There were years I tried to run. I would do 3 miles, right? Or is it a 5K, right? So I would do a little 5K. And every time I did it, I got back and thought, well, I still hate running. And that still sucked. I didn't have a great place to run. I just want to be able to run out my door, do 3 miles, and run right back into my door. So it's not that I didn't try.
He tried.
I did try. But silence was really hard for me, and being alone with my thoughts was really hard for me to discipline myself.
And I think that's something that so many people struggle with. And I mean, I've heard priests say, "Oh, I couldn't do a silent retreat. I can't." I'm like, "Ooh, if you say I can't do a silent retreat, that's a sure sign that you need a silent
to do one."
But it's like saying, people throughout the ages of every temperament and have all done, that's where the Lord is, silence. And so again, we look at the saints and say, I could never do that. And like, well, how about you practice? This is a fascinating story that Bishop Cousins told me, and I forget where they had encountered this man. Maybe it was in London or something, and on the subway, and he's got this pin on his jacket that says, "Ask me about the 5-minute club." And so, hey, what's the 5-minute club all about? And he goes, "This is the challenge for you. You want to be in the club this week? Take 5 days, take 5 minutes of silence each of those days. At the end of the week, call me. Here's my card."
That is brilliant.
And that's it. And then people are like, "Really? That's it? I can totally do it." And there's like no strings attached. There's no prize. There's no nothing. Just give me a call at the end. And like people are calling him and like, "That was amazing. Can I keep doing it? Can I do more than 5 minutes?" I think he told a story about like this dude who actually had a convert. This was like the beginning of his conversion. He was an atheist, and through this 5 minutes of silence, began to, have a relation, silence enough to like think actual thoughts.
Wow.
And, ask real questions and receive real answers. And
holy cow! Was the guy a Christian?
I think so. I don't remember the details, but I'm like, wow, that's
because I totally want to steal that.
Yeah,
absolutely brilliant.
We should challenge. Anybody listening right now? 5 minutes.
5-minute club.
5-minute club. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 5 days in a row. Just go into your room, turn off everything. Leave your phone somewhere else so you're not tempted. Just turn it off. Go sit in the woods. I mean,
we have become the most medicated society probably in history, in a society really that's desperate for comfort, and so much to such a great degree that frankly there's less suffering. Certainly, if you're in westernized, Europe or America, there's much less suffering now than there's ever been. To the point that I think sometimes people seek out sports even today in order to subconsciously implement some kind of suffering into their life because we really need it, and we fear it. There's this great line in the Frassati play that we're doing where Pier Giorgio is talking to his sister Luciana, and she's grappling with death, and she's very afraid of death. And he clarifies, he said, we're not afraid of dying, actually, we're afraid of the suffering. And I love that part of the play because it's very true. The discomfort of suffering needs to be instantly medicated with a drink or with a Netflix binge or a pill. I'm not against pills. I understand there are times for medication and all of that. But it's just interesting to me how quickly we seek to something hurts. I got to stop that. I got to stop the hurt. Not that
I'm bored. Boredom is a type of pain. Like I'm so bored.
I got to be stimulated. So for me, the idea of kind of leaning into the pain, so to speak, became a lot more real. And my little sister had been sick from 2003 to 2009, just really strange kind of disease that nobody could figure out, and involved a lot of pain and a lot of medication to keep her still. And thank God she came out of it. She and her husband have an amazing story through it. But one of the things I learned after that is I don't want to be so quick, if even just to honor her and what she suffered. I don't want to be so quick to medicate myself if I have a headache. Not that I necessarily was before, but after what she went through, I felt really convicted. I want to be okay with feeling pain. Certainly, it's one thing if I'm bleeding out or I've broken an arm, and I'm obviously we want to repair damage as quickly as possible to a degree. But I really wanted to, as I move forward with the rest of my life, I really felt this conviction that I needed to learn how to allow pain to be a part of my life in a way that I didn't resent it or immediately want to make it go away. And when I became Catholic, it was like, oh, that all makes sense now. And there's so much incredible writing. My mom actually sent me something by Father Francois. I'd have to look it up. It was in one of her little devotionals about pain, and she really resonated with it, and I did as well. And Catholics, to me, have such a better, more complete, and beautiful way of talking about pain. And when you look at the lives of saints, and you see it echoing all throughout their lives, how they dealt with pain, how they dealt with suffering, this beautiful resignation to it that I did not have in, I think, what I would call a formed way. And sports, athletics is a great way to have pain sort of accompany you along that journey in a way that you can't duplicate.
You have to push your body to the limit in order to increase capacity.
Yeah.
This is why you run to threshold sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes. You run back and forth down the field. You run hills.
Yeah, muscles have to break down to be built back up and grow. It's such a perfect analogy. And then Paul makes in Scripture is the one that gave this beautiful analogy of the body of Christ, of describing the Christian life as being a part of a body. And that was all my growing up, all my years exposed to Christ through my father. That was this great topic he really loved to address was the body and how we're so much like a body, and how the spiritual life really is just like the bodily life. Fulton Sheen took that to such an amazing degree. But what is it? 1 Corinthians, you have it right in front of you, 9.
Yeah, 9:24 says, "Do you not know that the runners in the stadium all run in the race, but only one wins the prize? Run so as to win. Every athlete exercises discipline in every way. They do it to win a perishable crown, but we an imperishable one. Thus I do not run aimlessly. I do not fight as if I were shadow boxing. No, I drive my body and I train it, for fear that after having preached to others, I myself should be disqualified." Other translations will say, I athletes deny themselves.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like Tom Brady, right? Like, have you heard the diet that he eats?
Oh my gosh.
You know,
Like no breaks, no cheating. I think he had some alcohol. He got a little drunk after the Super Bowl last year, but that's about as much as he drinks during the whole year. It's now granted Russell Wilson released his numbers last year. He spends $1 million a year on his body.
Wow.
That's how much he's budgeted.
Wow.
For massage and cryotherapy and whatever those guys do, to
Right.
keep. But like $1 million a year, he just setting aside.
And we can say, well, that's crazy, and it's like, this is what Paul's saying.
Yeah.
It's
not. It's crazy because of what it's done for. We still admire it. Brady just this last weekend had probably one of the best games of his career at 44, coming off a Super Bowl. I mean, he's doing something no one else has done before.
Right.
He has established himself as the greatest quarterback of all time. And he's a fairly likable guy, but that kind of dedication, and really it's to our great shame, the great shame of the Christian, that we find so few Christians willing to dedicate their life like that to our Maker.
Yeah.
But can
Yeah,
get
and,
really
and
into
to
sports.
like, okay, what's St. Paul saying? Like, well, what's the goal that we're shooting for? Heaven. And I think we've made heaven into something, not to, compare it to the Super Bowl, but if an athlete says, no, I want to go to the Super Bowl, so I'm gonna drive my body, I'm gonna train it, I'm gonna sacrifice, I'm gonna eat foods that I don't like, but I know that they're good for me. I'm gonna go to bed early, even though I'd rather stay up late. I'm gonna do all these things so that I can win.
Yeah.
And we think like, oh, heaven's like, oh, that's easy, so I don't have to really do anything.
A foregone conclusion.
But that's not what St. Paul says about heaven.
No.
What does he say about heaven?
And all something to be won.
Right. It's something to be, I'm working out my salvation in fear and trembling.
Right.
And I think if we took that a little bit more to heart and say, okay, what do I got to do to make sure, to strive? Yes, Jesus is doing this. We're cooperating with His grace, but the church invites us to fast and to pray and to go to confession, and like those are the easy ways of attaining salvation. So in a certain sense it's easy, but you're going to mass every day or every Sunday, you're praying every single day, you're going to confession every month, like you're doing these things to allow the Lord's grace to transform your life the way that this physical regimen has transformed the bodies of these athletes.
And what's amazing, of course, is at the end of all of that, at the end of a day or a week, we have a great satisfaction in spite of what might be happening, because it was the same Paul who wrote this passage that would say, I found the secret of being content in all things. It's I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So Christ is there with us, helping us as we work out these disciplines. But the impact on, or the theology of Paul's salvation, I think really comes through here in ways that I just never really considered. Like, well, if I'm just reading this straight, I beat my body, I make it my slave to win. Because if I don't, I fear I might be disqualified. I mean, that's exactly what he's saying. There's really no way around that. Not that we earn our salvation. It's not something I do through my own efforts here, but Paul is definitely talking about a really concerted cooperation with God and an intensity that, Scripture's pretty clear. He was kind of unmatched among the other 12 apostles, and even before he became an apostle and a Christian. Yeah. The other Pharisees were like, Paul's a little like overboard here.
Yeah.
But he took that intensity of his hatred for Christ, and it became this great love for Christ. And I don't know that any apostle suffered quite as much as Paul did. And I think Scripture's pretty clear on that. We don't know certainly all of the specific stories. We know how each of the apostles died. But Paul, you could see that in his life, like, oh my gosh, he really, really pushed himself to the limits. Yeah. And of course, the reward in heaven, like, how do you even, we don't even have human words to describe, like, what that would be like.
Because you ask Tom Brady or ask any athlete who's won the big thing or the gold medal and say, was all the training worth it?
Yes, but I want another one.
Yeah, I know. It's never enough, but it was always worth it. Yeah. Like none of them ever said like, yeah, no.
Now that I had it, like,
I wish I probably could have gotten away with a few less sprints, and probably wouldn't have hurt me to have a pizza every once in a while. Like they never say that,
no, you're right.
you know?
You're right. It's very interesting. But oh, to be satisfied, this
Hmm.
desperate search for satisfaction, which cannot be found. Again, though, properly ordered, sports can be very fulfilling, and can be a great part of our life and our walk as Christians. And certainly in American Christianity, there's something to be said about health in general and the need for all of us to be more active
Yeah, yeah.
and be involved in those things. But the spiritual realities are great. And I'm convicted again. I need more silence.
I had another connection for me as I was training, and kind of in this idea of how many of us see the goal of a deep prayer life, or I mean read Saint Teresa of Avila, she's like going in ecstasy and things. You're like, I don't think anybody would be like, well, no, I don't want that. It's like, no, that would be actually
would be
amazing,
amazing.
right? But we're not willing to do what it takes, and we think, well, it's too hard, too painful. I'd have to give up too much. You're working at it, So I started off running 2 miles and then 3 miles. So you start off doing your 5 minutes of silence, and then you increase that to 6 minutes. Your 5 minutes of silence, your 6 minutes of silence.
Suddenly it seems more attainable.
Right. And yeah, you get bored. And what I do when I get bored in prayer, one is you just remind yourself, like, yeah, my body hates it, but my soul's in charge here.
Amen.
And I'm gonna stay here in order to train my body.
Amen.
That this is the most important thing. And so I'm gonna keep going. Sometimes too, if that holy hour just drags on and on and on, you look at your clock after 3 hours and it's been 10 minutes. And,
What?
And I say, Lord, thank you for allowing this holy hour to seem longer than it really is, because it's like we're spending more time together than, an actual hour.
That's a very that's a great way to put it. Who was it that said noise is the music of the devil?
Maybe Mother Angelica or something.
It might have been. It was one of the beautiful quotes I heard. I realized that we live in the noisiest time in history, almost over-medicated, the noisiest time in history. All these things competing for our attention.
Yeah.
And as Christians, we have a hard time organizing our life. It seems very busy.
Right.
Suddenly, when you lay out kind of your hours from the moment you wake up to go to bed, like there's actually a lot of pointless things you're doing in there.
Right.
You could just be quiet.
So this is the connection that I had, because most people, when they think of running, they're like, oh man, I run and my knees hurt and my hips hurt, my back hurts, and we think of the painful things.
Yes.
Has anybody ever showed you how to run?
Oh, that's a good point.
Do you ever take running classes?
No.
Nobody takes running classes. You would never go and play tennis and just expect that you could play tennis.
That's a good
Right,
point. I can run. I don't need to be taught how to run.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
Well, one of the things I did as I was training, I started reading some stuff and watching some videos and getting some instruction on how to actually run. So what I did is I changed my run form. And all the pains I used to have when I would run in my knees and in my hips and things like that, they went away, because now I'm running correctly.
Nice fluid motion.
Running became so much more fun. I mean, it's still there's the work. I still have to wake up early and like, okay, I'm gonna go out, and sometimes it's cold and sometimes it's rainy and sometimes it's hot, and you're still so there's still that discipline and that suffering aspect of it. But the running itself wasn't painful.
Huh.
And sometimes I think too, we look at the saints, or the ideal of what a prayer life would look like, and say impossible or too painful or whatever, but nobody's ever actually taught us how to pray. And so if we're thinking, well, I mean, how many rosaries can I possibly pray in an hour? Or, it's like, I only have so many holy cards. How am I going to read all of those? Or, it's like, I only know, so many prayers. I know the St. Michael and I know the Hail Mary. And I was like, I can say all those. Like, okay, but do you want to really pray?
Yeah.
Because the saints, when they talk about prayer, they're not talking about rote prayer.
Yeah.
They're talking about like communion with the divinity.
Yeah.
And there's actually a method call it a method. There's a way to dispose yourself for that better than other ways to dispose yourself for that. But most Christians have never been taught. They're like most runners who just, I know how to run, I can go and run.
Yeah.
I know how to pray. I pray all the time, but it's just boring and I don't get much out of it.
You probably have the extreme sort of Catholic way of rote prayers and cards, and the extreme Protestant way, which is expository, completely expository. And like, I've been talking now for like 10 minutes. I can't think of anything else to say or praise him for any longer, or the people in my life on my list that I need to pray for.
Right.
I know very few people in my life, my parents being one, my dad in particular, like 2-3 hours can just go. Like,
expositorily?
yes.
Oh, wow.
like whole, like, just sort of sermons between he and the Lord kind of flowing out of him. But that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
So you have kind of those extremes, and in the saints we get this great example of like, these are normal people. Now some through their religious life may have had more time or whatever, but I appreciate that the Lord has given us these great examples. Like, no, here's one right here. Let's read about her life or his life, and anybody can do something like this.
Yeah.
And we just convince ourselves that we're too busy, or I'm married. I know that's an excuse I have a lot. Well, I'm not in a religious life. I'm not a monk or a priest or a nun or whatever, and I've got a wife and kids. And so my little goal has been, really the last 2 years, is, Lord, how deeply spiritual can I be during my day without abdicating my duties as a father and as a husband, whether it's morning or evening or in the car, or what time I have to just commune with you through reading or through prayer or through songs or anything like that. And just take what the day gives me is about as much as I can get, and I'm learning there's still a long way I need to go.
As with me as well. Final thought, and then maybe we just, anybody listening, 5 minute club.
5 minutes.
Join the 5 minute club, and then run a marathon next year. That's your homework for now. Last thought. Priest friend told me the other day, I was sharing my marathon experience with him, and he had run a marathon, and he said, when he was running the marathon, he just had this sensation of the cloud of saints, and because, especially the Twin Cities Marathon, they're just lined the entire way, 26.2 miles. There's not a place where there's not people cheering for you, holding signs, ringing bells, making all sorts of noise, cheering you on. They might know one or two people running, but they're cheering everybody on.
Yeah.
There's some people who just come out to cheer people on because they know what it's like to have run a marathon before, and they just want to cheer you on. And there's something beautiful about this.
Wow.
And this is the saints.
It's the Christian life.
It's a Christian life. We have thousands of saints lining our life, just cheering us on every moment. Like, you can do this. You can do this. I know it feels hard right now. I know that you're in pain right now.
And they do know.
And they do. Like, we've run this before. We've run this race. I've been right where you are. I know the mental game you're playing right now. But keep going. We're right there with you, and the prize is worth it.
Amen.
That was one that the people would always have the prize. Like, there's free beer at the end of the race, and then the jerks would have the one that said, like, I got free beer here I got free beer here right now if you want to just stop. See, you got those, but the saints aren't doing that. You got the devils who are doing that.
Hey,
just stop now. I got beer for you.
I've made up my mind that if I can look like Rocky or Tom Cruise when I run, then I'm going to try a marathon.
Yeah.
I'm going to watch some old Rocky videos and every Tom Cruise video where he runs. I'm going to practice that form and try and get, or just get better at going for silent walks, because walking is also healthy.
There you go.
Thanks for tuning in, folks. This has been a great conversation. We'll see you next time.
God bless.
At Catholic Order of Foresters, we're committed to bringing Catholic values to life and financially protecting Catholic families right here in Minnesota. Our members enjoy benefits like scholarship eligibility and peace of mind knowing their family is secure, even if something happens to them. Each year, thousands join us to support people in need through our Feeding God's Children events, spirituality tap-ins, and mission trips. Wouldn't you love to be a part of an organization that embodies your Catholic values? Find out how you can be a part of Catholic Order of Foresters by calling General Agent Brian Marketon at 763-658-4009. That's Brian at 763-658-4009.